Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new supporters, Anna B., who became our first member over on YouTube, and Ilsa, who's joined our Patreon. Thank you both so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, you'll find links for ways to do that in the show description. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's relax with more information about our feathered friends as we continue with Cassell's Book of Birds from the text of Dr. Brem by Thomas Reimer Jones, FRS, Professor of Natural History and Comparative Anatomy in King's College London, with upwards of 400 engravings and a series of colored plates. First published in 4 volumes in 1869 by Cassell, Petter and Gulpin, London and New York. Let's pick up right where we left off in the chapter on crackers, the enucleatores. Let's begin. The dwarf parrots. Among the most vivacious and docile members of this family, the dwarf parrots, Siticula, deserve our particular notice, for their behavior is quite in harmony with their beautiful exterior. The poets, says Schomburg, could not have been aware of the tender love that exists between a little pair of dwarf parrots, or they would never have selected doves as their models of ideal tenderness. Indeed, it is impossible to compare the latter with the former in this respect. Between these lovebirds, as we generally call them, there exists the most perfect harmony in all their acts and wishes. They eat together, share the same bath, and if the male bird utters his cry, his mate will instantly join her voice to his. Should one fall ill, the other feeds it, and however many may be assembled on a tree, the little couples never leave each other. It is well known that these elegant little creatures can only be reared in pairs, or at any rate, they must be allowed the society of some of their race. If taken young out of the nest before they have chosen a mate, it may happen that solitary individuals can be reared, but the older birds never survive the death of their little companions, and soon pine themselves to death. More need not be said in favor of these inseparable birds. The dwarf parrots are not larger than finches or larks, and are distinguished by their short, bluntly hooked beaks and strikingly short, small tails, the feathers of which are tolerably equal in size and pointed. The quills of their wings are short, and when the latter are closed, reach to the end of the tail. Their legs are likewise short and feeble. The plumage is soft, long, and large-feathered. The individual feathers are usually not bright, but strikingly colored and marked. We are acquainted with many species, which are spread over Africa, Asia, and South America, and resemble each other in their habits and mode of life. All are true parrots, climbing the branches with the greatest dexterity, flying rapidly, and feeding upon fruit and corn. The nests are made in the holes of trees, and their eggs are small, rounded, and white. Swinder's lovebird. Swinder's lovebird, Agapornis swinderiana, one of the prettiest members of this group, is a tiny creature, at most 5 inches in length, of which more than 1 inch belongs to the tail. It is about 9 inches broad, and each wing measures 3 inches from the shoulder to the tip. The prevailing color of the plumage is green. The underpart of the body, wings, and upper tail covers are a beautiful azure blue. The short, scarcely rounded tail is, with the exception of the 2 middle feathers, green, but bright red at the root and towards the end, with a black line dividing the 2 colors. The face, belly, and tail covers are yellowish green, and the upper part of the throat is surrounded by a black band. These beautiful birds inhabit the western and interior parts of Africa, but information as to their habits in their native land is entirely wanting. The sparrow parrot. The sparrow parrot, Citicula passerina, is one of the smallest of the Brazilian parrots, being scarcely or not at all larger than the species we have just described. The color of the plumage is a bright green, shaded into yellow upon the brow, face, and lower parts. The underside of the tail and tail covers are of a pale, bright bluish green. The anterior border of the wing, the large wing covers, the back, and secondary quill feathers, as well as the inner wing covers and the under part of the body, are of a bright ultramarine. The primary quills are blackish brown, with a green anterior edge. The beak is a bluish ashy green, the cere somewhat darker, the feet ash gray, with green scale-like plates. The eyes are brown. The sparrow parrot is very common in Brazil and inhabits both the woodlands near the sea coast and the bushes in dry districts, to which it is an admirable ornament. These birds come in troops into the gardens of the settlers like our sparrows, which they also resemble in the fact that when in company with others of their kind, they scream and chatter in a very confused manner, the united flock producing a shrill twittering sound. They settle in great numbers upon a tree or shrub to nibble the fruit, during which time the whole swarm is in unceasing confusion, climbing nimbly up and down the branches and whistling briskly. In other respects, the sparrow parrot lives after the same manner as the rest of its relatives, making the same kind of nest, sometimes using the deserted oven-shaped abode of the crested parrot, and laying from 3 to 4 white eggs upon the shreds of wood that cover the bottom of the hole. Both young and old are often captured by the Brazilians, and seem soon to forget the loss of their freedom if they are not separated from their mates. They are but short-lived, and for that reason seldom reach Europe. Still, it occasionally happens that with great care they will survive some years, and even breed in a state of captivity. The siskin parrot. The siskin parrot, Nasiterna pygmaea, the dwarf among the dwarfs belonging to this order, lives in New Guinea and the Papuan Highlands. Its green plumage is varied by a yellowish shade on the head, and the face is light golden brown. The middle tail feathers are blue, the rest are black with yellow tips. The beak is extraordinarily high and strong. As far as we know, This bird is not rare upon the high trees on the coast of New Guinea and in the forests of Salawatis and Missoul, but no observer has as yet given us particulars of its habits. Cockatoos. Amongst the different species of parrots with which Australia is enriched, the cockatoos, Plictolophus, take high rank. The members of this group are distinguished by their compact body, short tail, and wings of middle size. Their large, short, broad beak, toothed at the margin, the upper mandible of which terminates in a strong hook. The tongue is usually fleshy and smooth, the region of the eye bare, and the head decked with an upright tuft of bright and beautiful feathers. The plumage is generally very striking, either by reason of its pure white or delicate rose color, or, for a parrot, the unusually dark tints that predominate. Cockatoos are found not only in Australia, but in the Moluccas, New Guinea, and the Philippine Islands, where most kinds establish themselves in enormous flocks in the woods and fly from thence over the fields and plains, presenting an appearance that is enchantingly beautiful. Perched under the shadow of the dark foliage, says Mitchell, their bright wings and glowing crests transform the heights upon which they live into regions of the most exquisite beauty. In their habits and mode of life, cockatoos resemble other parrots and must be reckoned among the most pleasing of the whole race. It is quite true that when living together in large flocks, their cries frequently become a deafening noise, intolerable to ordinary ears, but a solitary bird is very engaging. Indeed, there is something so extremely tender in the tone in which it utters the word cockatoo, whence is derived the name, that it attracts us involuntarily, for the cry of cockatoo is always intended to express a kindly feeling, and changes when angry into a most fearful shriek. The cockatoo soon learns to make friends with mankind, plays fewer tricks than other parrots, appears grateful for any kindness that is shown to it, and seems eager to make a fitting return. Unkindness alone makes it ill-tempered or mischievous, and its excellent memory enables it to avenge an injury after the lapse of years. Its disposition in general is mild and gentle, and its good qualities numerous. It learns to speak with tolerable ease and fluency, forming the words into phrases as though it understood them, and applies whole sentences at a fitting opportunity. In their wild state, cockatoos assemble in large flocks, which remain more or less united even during the breeding season. They pass the night buried in the leafy shelter of the trees, and at break of day make the woods resound with their noisy screams as they rise into the air with light strokes of the wing, hovering and gliding till they reach a field yielding suitable food. Fruit, corn, and seeds constitute their principal nourishment, and they will also devour buds and bulbs, obtaining the latter very dexterously by the help of their long beaks. Every fresh occurrence in their daily life is greeted with loud cries, and should a second flock pass over the place where they have settled, their combined shrieks are perfectly appalling, and can only be imagined by those who have heard the yells a few captive cockatoos are capable of producing. As soon as hunger is appeased, these flocks retire to rest between the shelter of the branches, where they remain some hours in comparative quiet. They then again go in search of a meal, returning to pass the night on their accustomed trees. Thus they live till the breeding season, when they pair, and each couple sets out to find a suitable home, preferring holes in trees, but also resorting to fissures in the rocks. Certain precipices near the South Australian rivers are yearly visited by thousands of cockatoos, just as the cliffs of the North Seas are infested by huge flocks of seagulls. We are told that some of these rocks are completely honeycombed by them, and the strength and firmness of their beaks renders this assertion easily credible. They lay 2 white pointed eggs about the size of those of a bantam fowl, but in what manner incubation is carried on, we are not aware. We are told by travelers that they soon become timid if they suspect danger, and like other kinds of parrots, carry on their depredations with so much cunning that it is very difficult or indeed impossible to drive them from the fields. The natives hunt them in a very peculiar manner. Perhaps, says Captain Gray, it would be impossible to imagine a more exciting spectacle than that of seeing the Australians hunt the cockatoo. They employ for this purpose a very remarkable weapon called a boomerang. This is a sickle-shaped, flat instrument made of wood, which can be thrown by the hand to a distance of 100 feet, and flies in small circles with many windings from the direct path. An Australian will follow a flock either into the fields or woods, preferring, however, places where large trees are situated near water, such spots as these being the favorite resort of the cockatoos. Here they are to be found in innumerable hosts, climbing on the branches or flying from tree to tree. Here they also sleep, and here the wily native comes, most watchfully observing all necessary precautions. He goes from one tree to another and creeps from bush to bush, taking the greatest care not to disturb the wary birds, but in vain, for however quiet his movements may be, he is soon discovered, and his near approach greeted with a hideous cry. The birds have already perceived that danger is at hand, though they do not know what the next step may be. At length their pursuer reaches the water and discloses his form to their view. Amidst piercing shrieks, the white cloud of birds rises into the air, and at the same instant the Australian throws his weapon amongst them. The boomerang, which is thrown with great force, dances and springs in the most wonderful manner over the water, and then rising higher and higher in its wayward flight, is soon careering in the midst of the frightened multitude. A second, a third, and a fourth weapon is discharged. In vain the terrified creatures try to escape. The apparently aimless course of the missile bewilders them and delays their flight. One after the other is struck by the boomerang and comes to the ground. It is only when the hunter has attained his end that the remainder of the terrified flock hide themselves in the foliage of the trees. The flesh of the cockatoo is tolerably good, and the soup made from it excellent. The number of these birds that find a home with us prove that they are easily captured, and like all other parrots, they will live a long time if nourished with simple food. The lemon-crested cockatoo. The lemon-crested cockatoo, Cockatoos galerita, is known by its white color, which in some specimens presents the appearance of having had a delicate red breathed upon it, and by its perfectly shaped tuft, formed of 2 rows of long and slender feathers that can be raised or lowered at pleasure. This long tuft or crest, the wings, and the inner web of the tail feathers are of a pale brimstone color at the root. The eye is deep brown, the beak black, and the foot grayish-brown. The length of this species is about 1 foot 4 inches. We are at present uncertain whether this bird is spread over Van Diemen's Land, as well as over the whole of Australia and New Holland, or whether these countries are inhabited by different species of very similar plumage. A careful examination of the cockatoos most abounding in those 3 regions has shown a decided difference in the construction of the beak and justifies the last mentioned opinion. According to Gould, the lemon-crested cockatoo is common to all the Australian settlements except those to the west. These birds live in flocks of hundreds and thousands, much preferring open plains or slightly wooded districts to the forests near the coast. Leadbetter's cockatoo. The Inca or Leadbetter's cockatoo, Cockatoa leadbetteri, another species found on the continent of Australia, differs from the bird we have just described in the arrangement of its colors. Its plumage is white, but the forehead, sides of the neck, the middle and under surface of the wings are of a beautiful rose tint. The crest is magnificent, the individual feathers of which it is composed are bright red at the root, spotted with yellow in the middle, and tipped with white. When the plume is laid back, nothing but the white tips can be seen, but it is no sooner raised than the blazing red appears, and the yellow spots unite themselves into a stripe that renders its appearance still more striking. The spaces around the eyes are light brown, the beak light horn color, the foot dark brown. The female is somewhat paler on the lower part of the body and has large yellow spots upon the crest. Gould tells us that these splendid birds are spread over the whole of South Australia, living principally upon the high gum trees and brushwood near the rivers of the interior. They are found principally near the Darling and Murray rivers and do not extend as far as the northwestern coast. During the breeding season, they appear in great numbers in certain localities and animate the otherwise monotonous forests of the interior. The voice of the Inca cockatoo is more plaintive than that of its congeners, and its scream not so harsh. The helmet cockatoo. The helmet cockatoo, Callicephalus galeatus, also deserves notice as being the type of the tribe that forms the connecting link between the true cockatoos and the garingeros or raven cockatoos of New Holland. This bird is known by its short, vaulted beak, which has a slightly projecting hook on the upper mandible, and by its tolerably strong and rounded tail. The plumage is beautiful and richly marked. The upper part of the body is a dark slate blue, the forehead, cheeks, and crest scarlet. All the feathers except the primary and secondary quills and the tail feathers are slender and edged with whitish gray, more deeply on the upper than on the under part of the body. The female is darker and almost of a slate color, the upper surface of the neck and back sprinkled with pale gray, and the rest of the body marked with irregular grayish-white stripes. The feathers on the under parts of the body are of a brimstone color, edged with dusky red. The spaces round the eyes are blackish-brown. The beak light horn color. The feet black and sprinkled with a grayish kind of dust. We have no knowledge whatever of these birds in their native state. Gould tells us that they are found in the woods on the southern coast of Australia and on some of the neighboring islands, as also in the northern parts of Van Diemen's Land, where they inhabit the highest trees and luxuriate upon the seeds of the different kinds of eucalyptus. Many species of cockatoos are remarkable for the peculiar formation of their beaks, the upper part of which is unusually prolonged. These birds form a distinct group, but much resemble the true cockatoos, and have therefore been placed among them. Such, for example, is the nose cockatoo. The nose cockatoo, Licmetis nasicus, is from 16 to 17 inches in length. The beak measures along the ridge about 2 inches. Both sexes are of the same color, the whole plumage being white, the underwing and tail covers mottled with pale brimstone yellow. All the feathers on the head and neck, as far as the upper part of the breast, are vermilion red, white at the tip. A vermilion stripe runs across the forehead, reaching to the back, and passes like a pair of eyebrows over the eyes. There is also a crooked line of red upon the breast. The beak is light horn color, the feet ash gray. Some of the feathers near the cheeks can be raised at will. Gould considers that there are 2 species of this bird, one of which is found in Western Australia or New South Wales, the other confined to Port Phillip and Southern Australia. The nose cockatoos seem rather to inhabit the interior than the neighborhood of the seacoast. They assemble in large flocks and spend the night and noonday upon the summits of the forest trees, passing, however, a considerable portion of their time on the ground, where they run, or rather hop, somewhat slowly. Their flight, on the contrary, is very rapid and much lighter than that of their congeners. Their food consists of corn and seeds, but principally of buds and the bulbs of different plants, more especially of orchids, which they obtain by the help of their long and curiously shaped beak. Their 2 white eggs, which resemble those of the tufted cockatoos, are generally laid on a bed of decayed wood upon the ground, or in some hole in a large gum tree. This species can endure captivity for many years, and has lately been brought to Europe in great numbers, but notwithstanding this, it is not often met with in our collections. Gould has observed that a caged nose cockatoo is much more sullen, gloomy, and irritable than others of its race, and this we can fully confirm, having had for a year one of these birds in our possession that has never become reconciled to its keeper, but threatens with its beak all who approach. It cannot endure to be stroked or touched, and everything unusual excites its rage. At such times it erects the small horseshoe-shaped crest upon its brow, so that the splendid red feathers are displayed, wags its head violently, repeatedly snaps its beak, and screams most furiously. The word cockatoo is mingled with its cries, but uttered in quite another tone to that employed by its congeners. The latter generally utter it in a soft, drawling manner, whilst the nose cockatoo, on the contrary, pronounces the 2 first syllables hurriedly, and lays a strong emphasis on the last. The facility with which this parrot can move its beak in any direction is very remarkable, and no other species that we are acquainted with has such suppleness and command of the joints of its jaws. The beak of the nose cockatoo is, indeed, the most extraordinary pair of pincers that ever was constructed. In justice to this bird, we must add to the foregoing remarks that it may occasionally be made very tame, and not only learns to speak, but is able to apply its language very intelligently. There is one in the zoological gardens at Antwerp that is a universal favorite with the visitors, with whom it converses freely, greeting its acquaintances as soon as they appear, without the slightest ill humor or sullenness. The Nestor Cockatoo. The Nestor Cockatoo, Nestor productus, represents a very remarkable tribe of parrots, recognizable by their extraordinarily elongated beak and sickle-shaped upper mandible, which projects far beyond the lower. The tail is of middle size, the points of the tail feathers being in some places denuded of their web, and the wings, when closed, reach nearly to the middle of the tail. The tarsus is decidedly higher, and the plumage harsher and more imbricated than in other cockatoos. In our specimen, it is much variegated. The upper part of the body is brown, the head and back of the neck mottled with gray, each of the feathers covering these parts being bordered with a darker shade. The under part of the body and tail covers are of a deep red. The breast, throat, and cheeks are yellow, the latter having a reddish tint. The tail feathers are orange at the root and striped with brown. The inner web of the quills is dark red and brown. The bare place round the eyes, the legs, and the cere are of an olive brown. The beak is brown, and the eye a very dark brown. Both sexes are similarly colored, but the young are of a dark olive brown on the breast, instead of being adorned with the red and gold that decks their parents. The Nestor cockatoos are not only striking in their appearance, but lead a somewhat remarkable life. They are confined to a very limited district, only inhabiting New Zealand and the neighboring islands. The bird we have just described is only found on Philip's Island, the circumference of which does not exceed 5 miles, and Gould informs us that people living for many years on Norfolk Island, at about 4 or 5 miles distance, have never seen it. The extremely limited extent of the habitat of this species is very unpromising as regards its preservation, and it will doubtless soon share the fate of the Dronte. Since the cultivation of the island, it has been periodically hunted, and its days are numbered. Probably it is already extinct, as we have seen nothing of it for several years. The rocky parts of the island, partially covered with trees, form, or rather did form, its favorite resort. Here it passes its time principally upon the ground, seeking for roots which it digs up with its beak, at least so we imagine, as the bill is often found covered with earth, and indeed we can well believe that so remarkable an instrument may be employed for this purpose. According to some naturalists, it sucks nectar, although its tongue does not, like that of the lory, end in a tuft, but has only a nail-like horny plate at the tip, closely resembling the nail upon a human finger. The hard nuts that other parrots enjoy are avoided by the Nestor, whose beak is not strong enough to break the shell. Gould saw one of these birds in the possession of Major Andrews in Sydney. It was a cheerful, lively companion, and seemed fully inclined to attract the attention of strangers. Its habits differed considerably from those of other parrots, and its owner did not keep it in a cage, but allowed it to fly about the entrance hall. We are told of another tame Nestor that it had a great fondness for green food, and would pick the leaves of lettuce and other juicy plants. The voice of this bird has a harsh, quavering, snarling sound, much reminding us of the barking of a dog. As regards its propagation, we only know that it is said to lay 4 eggs in some hole in a tree. The eagle cockatoo. The eagle cockatoo, Dasyptilus piqueti, belongs to the same division as the last named species and is remarkable for its shape and plumage, reminding us in some respects of the birds of prey. Nothing positive can be said as to its native land. Gould tells us that it lives on the island of Formosa, where no other parrots are known, but it would rather appear to be an inhabitant of New Guinea or Sulawesi. Indeed, Rosenberg speaks decidedly as to the first named island being its home. The eagle cockatoo is about 20 inches long, 10 of which are included in the tail. The wings are 10.5 inches in length. This species is recognized by its beak, the upper portion of which does not rise so high above the lower mandible as in the nestor, and by the plumage of the head, consisting of a few stiff bristles and slender upright feathers with very stiff hard shafts. The cheeks and cheek stripes appear almost bare. The wings and tail are shaped like those of the last mentioned bird, though the tail is somewhat longer and more rounded. The plumage is of a brilliant black, shading into gray on the throat, head, and breast, the feathers of these parts being sprinkled with pale brown. The wing covers along the carpus, the first wing covers of the secondary quills, the first 5 feathers of the secondary quills on their outer web, the feathers of the axilla, belly, and rump are of a beautiful scarlet, which is somewhat darker on the under tail covers. The upper tail covers are edged with dark red. The beak is black and the feet dark brown. Notwithstanding the extreme rarity of this creature, we have been able to take our description from a living bird, which was for some time in the Earl of Derby's celebrated collection. In New Guinea and the neighboring islands, Sulawesi, Misul, and Waigui, we find several kinds of parrots that are included among the cockatoos, although their resemblance to these birds is merely superficial. These are the long-billed parrots, Microglossus of Le Vaillant, very large birds of a dark color. Their resemblance to the cockatoos consists principally in their short, square tail and the plume upon the head, although the latter is of quite a different shape to that of the true cockatoo. Their naked cheeks and enormous upper mandible remind us of the araras. The shape of the tongue is quite peculiar. This organ is of medium length, fleshy, but no broader than it is thick. The upper surface is hollow and flattened at the tip. This strangely shaped tongue can be protruded and employed as a spoon to convey food into the mouth, the edges being very flexible and capable of being bent towards each other. The other distinguishing characteristics of the long-billed parrots are the naked tarsi, which are bare as far as the heel joints, and the short, flat soles of the feet. The cosmalos. The cosmalos, Microglossus aterimus. The best known of these species is an inhabitant of New Guinea and is one of the largest of the parrot tribe, even exceeding most of the araras in this respect. Its plumage is uniformly deep black with somewhat of a greenish gloss. The living bird has a grayish appearance, owing to a white, meal-like dust, which, as in most other parrots, is scattered over its plumage. The naked, wrinkled cheeks are of a red color. The crest is formed by a number of long, slender, isolated feathers, and is of a lighter gray than the rest of the plumage. Little is known of these birds in their natural state. The large-beaked parrot, says von Rosenberg, is not rare in the islands of Waigui, Misul, and Sulawesi, and is found on the coast of New Guinea. It usually perches at the very top of the highest trees, keeping its body constantly in motion, and whilst resting, or when by powerful strokes of its wings, it raises itself into the air, it utters a trumpet-like note, quite different from that produced by the white cockatoo. The natives take the young birds from the nest, and when they have reared them, sell them to traders. In captivity, they seem to prefer the fruit of the canary tree, the hard shell of which they manage to crack with the utmost facility. One of these so-called cockatoos, belonging to a resident in Amboina, was in the habit of flying about all over the town, but always returned home at the proper time to take its meals and to sleep. Von Martin saw a tame parrot of this kind at Mahai. The black cockatoo, he observes, when perched stiffly with its tail erect, red face and powerful beak, has the air of an old general, and owing to its extreme ugliness, makes a forcible impression on all who see it. It is quiet and slow in its movements, but allows strangers to approach, and utters from time to time a disagreeable, harsh, guttural shriek. According to Rosenberg, the large-beaked parrot is often seen at Amboina, where it may be bought for about 20 or 25 shillings. In Europe, these remarkable birds are amongst the greatest curiosities in our collections. Unlike all other parrots with which we are acquainted, the cosmalos uses its peculiarly formed tongue in a strange manner. Taking its food with its foot, it carries the morsel to its beak, tears it up, and presses the end of the tongue, which is provided with a round horn-like plate upon the pieces which stick to it. The tongue is then drawn in and the food swallowed. This being a very slow process, the meal usually occupies a considerable time. The raven cockatoos, Calyptorhynchus, differ very materially from all other species, not only in the color of their feathers, but in their form. The beak is short, crescent-shaped and sloping, owing to the great breadth of the lower jaw. The wings are large and broad, reaching only over the first third of the long, strong, and rounded tail. The crest is comparatively small. The raven cockatoos, or garingeros, are found exclusively in New Holland, and there only in certain districts. Gould, the great explorer of Australian ornithology, mentions 6 species in his masterly work, and gives a tolerably full account of their mode of life. There is, however, great similarity between them, and the following observations may be considered as applicable to all. The raven cockatoos are truly tree birds, feeding principally upon the seeds of the eucalypti and other trees indigenous to the country, but unlike other parrots, they will occasionally eat large caterpillars. Another peculiarity is that they only congregate in small parties consisting of not more than from 4 to 8 individuals, and never assemble in considerable flocks. Each part of Van Diemen's Land has its peculiar species. The manner in which the raven cockatoos feed is also very peculiar. Some species break off the little twigs of the fruit trees while eating, apparently out of mischief, and all use their sharp beaks to draw the concealed living insects, principally larvae, out of the wood. The large caterpillars which they obtain from the gum trees do not always satisfy their hunger. They wage war upon the grubs that lurk deep in the wood, dexterously stripping off the bark and picking large holes in the branches until they reach their prey. Some species prefer insects to any other kind of nourishment, whilst others subsist on seeds, principally those of the casuarina and banksias. Fruit they seem to despise, although they destroy much out of pure mischief, plucking it before it is ripe, to the great annoyance of the owners. So far as we know, the Garangaros breed exclusively in the holes of trees, always choosing the highest and most unapproachable trunks, and invariably such as the natives cannot climb. They prepare no regular nest in the holes which they select, or at most only collect chips of wood from the ground wherewith to line the interior. They lay from 2 to 5 tolerably large eggs, 1 2/3 inch in length and 1 1/3 inch broad. Besides the attacks made upon them by man, the raven cockatoos often become victims to birds and beasts of prey. Europeans do not prize their flesh very highly, but by the natives it is esteemed a delicacy. Banks raven cockatoo. Banks raven cockatoo, Calyptorhynchus banksii, attains the length of 1.5 feet. The plumage of the male is black, the only exception being the tail, which is a brilliant black with a greenish sheen. The female is greenish-black upon the head, spotted with yellow on the neck and wings, and striped with light yellow upon the breast. The male has a broad scarlet band extending along the middle of the tail, but not reaching the 2 middle feathers or the outer edge of the side feathers. The female has broad yellow and reddish-yellow spotted stripes similarly disposed, both upon the outer and the underside of the tail covers. Banks raven cockatoo belongs to New South Wales and is principally found in the district between Moreton Bay and Port Phillip, though by no means rare in the immediate neighborhood of Sydney and other large towns. Its flight is heavy. The wings are lax and seem to move with difficulty. It seldom rises high in the air, but will nevertheless sometimes fly for a mile at a stretch. Whilst on the wing it utters a loud cry, which is less shrill than the harsh screech of the cockatoo. When on the ground, these birds move with difficulty. Upon the tops of trees their motions are less deliberate, but always slow. Most of them are shy and distrustful, owing no doubt to the manifold persecutions from which they suffer, and it is only during feeding time that they are less upon the watch. They are much attached to their companions, and should one of them be killed or wounded, the hapless individual is seldom deserted by the others, who generally fly about him, uttering a wailing cry, and expose themselves so recklessly to the hunter that he, knowing how to avail himself of this habit, often succeeds in capturing the whole flock. The kakapo, or night parrot of New Zealand. For the same reason that the owls and the falcons are grouped as distinct families, we shall consider the kakapo, or night parrot of New Zealand, Strigops hebroptilus, as the type of a peculiar race. This bird indeed reminds us so forcibly of the owls that were it not for the structure of the foot, we should decidedly class it as one of them. Its scientific name of owl-faced Strigops is very well chosen. The large body of this species is covered with soft, delicate feathers, which form a rudimentary veil about the face. The wings are short and trough-shaped, the tail long and rounded, the beak long, bent like that of an owl, and nearly covered with stiff, bristle-like feathers. The feet are of middle size, the toes long. The general color is a dark green, interspersed with tolerably regular stripes and some irregular yellow spots. Upon the breast, the color is lighter and yellower than on the back, and the stripes are indistinct. The green tail is banded with dark brown. The habitat of the kakapo is restricted to New Zealand, and the species is now found in tolerable abundance only in the most remote alpine valleys of the southern island. It has been nearly exterminated in the northern portion. Lyle and Hast have given us full particulars of its habits. The kakapo, says the first of these writers, is still found occasionally in the northern districts of New Zealand, frequenting the dry cliffs or the low grounds near the banks of the rivers, where the high trees and woods are to some extent free from ferns and brushwood. The first time we met with it was upon some hills, rising 4,000 feet above the level of the sea, but we afterwards found it living with others of the same species on open spots near the mouth of the river and not far from the coast. Most striking, adds Hast, is the fact that the kakapo, except in the valley of the Makavora formed by the Lake Wanaka, is never seen east of the mountains, although forests abound there. Apparently, the absence of woodland in the intervening district is an obstacle to its farther progress in that direction. These birds are less numerous in the Wilkin Valley, where I have observed traces of the wild dog. In the Valley of the Hunter, which is only separated from these districts by a chain of not very high mountains and some inconsiderable hills, no trace of them is to be found, although the fine beech forests offer them a favorable retreat. In such places, says Lyle, the tracks of the kakapo were visible. These are about a foot wide, very regularly worn, and often resemble in so striking a manner those made by men that at first we really believed that the natives must have been in the neighborhood. The kakapo lives in holes under the roots of trees and in the cavities of overhanging rocks. Lyle tells us that the holes he saw had 2 openings, and the trees above them were for some distance hollow. The kakapo, he says, was not visible by day, except when driven from its retreat, and he was never able to find it but with the help of dogs. When these birds were more plentiful, the natives used to catch them at night by torchlight. There is a breed of half-wild dogs in the northern part of this island, continually hunting the kakapos, which indeed they have almost exterminated. It is said that the spread of these dogs is arrested by a river, but it is to be feared that so soon as they succeed in crossing that barrier, the total extinction of these birds will ensue, for although they use their beak and claws very energetically and can make a powerful resistance, still, sooner or later, they must succumb to their 4-footed enemy and ultimately share the fate of the moa, the dronte, and other species recently become extinct. The Maoris assure me, says Hast, that the kakapo is brave and often confronts the dogs with success, but this cannot be credited if their dogs are worth anything, for mine never had any serious battle with it. At first, the dog was attacked both by beak and claw, but it soon learnt to conquer its game by biting it through the back. An idea was formerly entertained that the kakapos were nocturnal in their habits, but our observations lead us to believe that this is not exactly the case. We generally heard their voices about an hour after sunset, in places which were rendered dark and obscured by thick foliage, and they then began to sweep about, attracted by the light. We, however, twice saw these birds during the day feeding upon the ground, and strictly upon their guard against approaching danger. On the first occasion, about noon on a cloudy day, we were returning through an open wood from the western coast, and saw the kakapo sitting upon an uprooted tree, not far from the Hast River. As we approached, it quickly disappeared, but was caught by the dogs, The second time, on a clear day, as we entered a deep ravine, we saw one of these birds perched 10 feet high upon a fuchsia tree, the berries of which it was eating. As soon as it saw us, it fell as though shot to the earth and disappeared beneath the surrounding blocks of stone. The most astonishing thing was that the bird made no use of its wings. Indeed, did not even open them to break its fall. In order to ascertain whether it would either fly or flutter, we followed, and having with us a kakapo that had been taken uninjured by the dogs, we set it free upon a large, open, gravelly spot where there was plenty of room to run away if it wished to do so, or to raise itself into the air, even should it require a large space for that purpose. We were much surprised to find that it only ran to the nearest thicket, and that much faster than we would have thought possible from the structure of its toes and the bulk of its body. Its movements resembled those of a barn door fowl. We stood on one side of it, and it appeared to us that it kept its wings quite close to the body, but one of our companions who was behind it observed that the wings were slightly raised but motionless, so that doubtless they are employed more as a means of balancing the bird than to accelerate its progress. Though its shape is not suited to running, it can progress in this manner to a considerable distance, as we often saw by its tracks, which extended sometimes for more than a mile over sand and shingle down to the bank of the river. Lyle, however, has seen this bird flying, though only for trifling distances. During our hunt, he says, we only saw the kakapo fly when, having climbed a hollow tree, it wished to reach another in the neighborhood. From the first tree, it flew down to the next in height, making its way up each in turn, climbing very quickly to the top by the help of its tail. The motion of the wings was very trifling, indeed, almost imperceptible. And while our author has much more to say about the kakapo, I think we'll end our evening's reading from Cassell's Book of Birds, which continues to be a treasure trove of information. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see the many, many illustrations in it, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.